All right. Hello, hello. And I've got you on. So let's
Hello.
just, for the purposes of starting the interview off, what is your name?
Okay, my full name is Mary Grace San Pablo Burns.
And you are Filipino, yeah?
Yes. Yes, apparently.
Confirm this for the record.
Yeah, so my mom is full Filipino, my dad is half Filipino, half Irish.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So what was it like kind of growing up in a Filipino household? Like actually outside of the Philippines, because you weren't born in the Philippines, right?
Oh, I was born there. I was born,
you were?
Yeah, so I was born in Olongapo City in 1982. And then my father was the first one to come to the U.S.
When was that?
1982. So the legend goes, like, I'm the lucky charm of the family, apparently, because around the time that they found out my mom was pregnant with me,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a surprise because I was a menopause baby, so she was 40.
Oh, wow.
Or 42.
Good for her.
Like that. Yeah. You know. And so super young child. Around the time they found out that they were going to have me was when they found out my dad was able to come and claim his citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
So he came over first out of the immediate family, but his sister had already been here for a couple of years, or for a while, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so he left that August, but I was born in May, so I was about 3 months old when he left.
Oh, dang.
And so it was about 2.5 years until the rest of the family was able to come over. So I think I was around 4, yeah, no, 2, 2.5 through 3-ish when I came here. I'm not too familiar with the story, and they keep changing the years, so I just know I was really young, but was unfamiliar with my surroundings. But yeah, so growing up in the Filipino household, I just remember. Well, it's kind of different because both my parents worked really long hours and multiple jobs.
What do they do?
Well, my dad started out as a janitor in a state hospital. It's like a state mental hospital. So there's for the criminally insane.
Oh, that can't be fun.
Not at all.
I'm sure they can make a mess.
So there's they call them the criminally insane, and then for folks who are unable to take care of themselves or take care of their loved ones, they put him in these hospitals. So he was a janitor there for quite a while, and then they found out he was really good with numbers, and so he became their kind of like payroll accountant or human resources, that's what it was. So he took care of like checks and stuff. So he was there, and then my mom, at one point, I remember her working 3 jobs. So she had always worked for the Red Cross in the Philippines, so they kind of just made her office manager or secretary of the chapter of the Porterville chapter. Porterville is where we lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was the secretary there, and then she worked full-time retail at Kmart. And then at some point she worked a night job where she worked like as a lever operator at a carpet factory. So they were always at work, and I just remember hanging out with my older siblings, particularly my sister, who's 10 years older than me.
How many siblings do you have?
I have 3. So I have an older brother who's in Minnesota now. I have an older sister who teaches at UCLA, who's a professor at UCLA. And then I have my other sister who works as a counselor at Puget Sound University. So we're kind of scattered.
So you're all kind of like a college-based family at this point, huh?
Yeah, it's really funny. We all couldn't be doctors, so we went into education, something like that.
But it sounds like a lot of hours.
Yeah, either way, it's a lot of
I
hours.
think being in college would be a little bit more fun.
Yeah.
So I mean, what were the differences that you can remember from being a small child in the Philippines versus moving here? Like, how did the household dynamics change, or did your family really work at and succeed at sort of maintaining what you can remember of your household when they moved here?
Well, I know that when we lived in the Philippines, like, we had a lot of people in the house. So, or we were close to people. We were close to, like...
very neighborly?
Like, physically
kind of?
close, like, to our my grandmother and my mom's siblings. So it was this extended family type of where we all would grow up together. And so when we came here, it was a little bit like that for my older siblings with my dad's family. My dad's family is already established in California, and so they all grew up together. But since I was the youngest and I was out of the loop most of the time, I kind of just grew up by myself. And so I think that was the biggest thing is, they all had someone to grow up around, cousins or neighbors or somebody in the Philippines. But then when we came here, like, they're a bit older. They were all already, like, trying to go to college.
How much older than you is your closest sibling?
Well, my sibling was, my closest sibling's 10. So she was 14. She was only there for 4 years, and then she went straight to college. So everyone else, college already, or only a little bit of high school and then college, because they all left at 18. I was the only one to stay past 18. So I forget that I have siblings sometimes because they were out of the house, and so I was only kid, and then my parents worked all the time, so I was a latchkey kid, so I was home alone a lot. And so I think that was also a really big thing, because, for some reason I wasn't able to hang out, or people couldn't take care of me, like they would in the Philippines. In the Philippines you have, not servants, but you have people to help you, right?
Yeah.
You have people come in.
A little more communal.
Yeah, I would say a little more communal. And then they'd also have a yaya, or like a nanny, who was a relative, who would just come and take care of you. But we didn't have that, so.
That's funny. Yaya was the nickname my little sister gave me when she couldn't pronounce my name.
Cool. The nicknames kind of come around too in the Philippines, in Filipinos, and so everyone had their distinct, like, family nickname, But with me, I didn't get one. Everyone else did, but I didn't get one. So that was another difference. So it was like, even within my own family, it was very culturally different because I was raised very American. I'm the only one who they didn't teach a Filipino language to.
So all of your siblings,
all of them do,
speak a Filipino language, but
they all speak Tagalog and parts of Pampangan, which is my mother's language. And I don't. I speak English, but it's funny because I know I was multilingual at some point in my life.
That's gotta be strange.
Yeah. So, we came, 2 years old. I was speaking 2 different languages. I was speaking Pampangan and Tagalog. And then when we came here, I tacked on Spanish because we lived in a very...
Do you still speak Spanish now, or did it sort of fall by the
wayside?
wayside?
When we first moved to California, we lived in a very small migrant town, probably like maybe 1,500 people, and the majority of them were Spanish speakers. And so the school that I went to, or the daycare that I was dropped off at, Spanish speakers. So I grew up speaking Spanish, and then we moved from that little migrant town to the surrounding quote-unquote city, which was Porterville. And then, culture shock again, majority of them were white. And so the first thing they did was, like, put me into ESL, like, for kindergarten and first grade, so that then I could speak English. And then immediately, because of that, forgot everything else I was taught or had learned over my young years. And so ever since then, I've just been speaking English. But
have you ever considered, like, picking up, like, Tagalog or something like that again? Or are there a lot of resources that you found for even learning it?
I've tried. I've tried to ask my parents to teach me, and they've tried and got frustrated. My siblings, other family members.
It's a lot harder when you're not immersed, I'd imagine, and when you're just
It is, and it's also, when I would ask, they're like, why? You don't need to. They're like, we're in America, why do you need Tagalog? So it's very weird, because I was like, that's what you guys speak. Like, why can't I speak it? And they're like, it's not important. And I was like, oh, all right then. And then now, like, all they do is
so they can talk about you behind your back.
That's what I felt. I was like, you guys are just being mean. And all the cousins, too. All the cousins, everyone spoke it. I was, like, the only one. Now the younger generation, like, the folks who were born after me, like, they don't speak it either. But, yeah, it was a touchy subject for a while, because then I was just like, you guys just don't like me, And then there's also that idea of, like, that I didn't need it, that it wasn't it wasn't an important enough language for me to use in the U.S. But everyone in my family spoke it, so it was really confusing to me trying to balance that idea.
That is kind of isolating, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Especially like, I guess coming from, because, for instance, my family's very communal, and if anybody spoke a different language from the other people, there would be, like, mayhem. Like, everyone would get so upset, because it sounds like it's kind of isolating a little bit.
It is. And I pick it up every now and then. Like, I knew certain, words or phrases growing up in the household, but, we mostly spoke English, and then, even like coming up here, I pick out more, just living in the Bay Area because it's kind of just around me. But even then, like I still can't figure things out. I've tried, Rosetta Stone. I've tried.
Do they have that for that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, they have. For Tagalog, and then I've tried, taking classes, like face-to-face classes with teachers, but it's.
Not sticking?
It won't stick with me. So it's very...
Which is strange because you spoke it at one point.
Yeah, that was all I spoke for about good 3 years of my life.
That's funny.
It's completely gone now, yeah.
So, like, you visit the Philippines.
I did.
Every now and then, or is it like a regular thing, or is it just like a couple times that you've done so?
I've only done it once. I was there for 2 weeks. And it was... It's funny because my parents, I think, when I was in community college... I started community college in 2000. And my parents were like, oh, well, we saved money. Do you want to go to the Philippines? I was like, no, I got to go to school. And, they made it like a yearly, every other year when they could afford it. And so they would go back quite a bit for a month. And I would just hang out at school and work at my pizza place. And I thought that was like the important thing in my life. It's like, no, I have to do these things. I can't go back with you. And so... So I put it off for a real long time, and then around 2007, I was like, you know what, okay, I need to go back, I really need to go back, and so...
What motivated feeling, why did you feel like you needed to?
Well, I moved to San Francisco to go to San Francisco State in spring of 2006, and in fall of 2006, I was taking Filipino classes, which I didn't know existed, ever.
I didn't until I came here either, actually.
Right? I didn't know Filipinos wrote books. I didn't know they were in,
Yeah, there were, I think in my high school, up in the foothills, there were like 3 Filipino kids. 3.
Well, I think with us, there was like maybe 20 in my high school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that most of them were my cousins. So it was like, I didn't know Filipinos did anything. And so when I took a Filipino lit class, and then I took a Filipino psychology class, and then I was like, all right, I need to go back to the Philippines, because there's shit obviously that I'm missing that I want to know about, and those classes, and I was also in a Filipino organization that was very political about like trying to go back and I don't know what we were trying to do, like disrupt the Philippine government to not be corrupt, but I don't know how I was doing that. I just knew I needed to.
Yeah.
And so so I went back in around New Year's 2007, and I had this very different idea of what the Philippines would look like. Because the books that we read and the things that we learned, it always talked about like, oh, the richness of the Philippine land and soil and trees and, how beautiful it was and fish. And so I was thinking like, oh, completely tropical. But honestly, in my head, I was like, oh, completely like, there's going to be nothing there but jungle. And I don't know, tribes. I don't know what I was thinking, right? I was like, oh, I'm going to go, I'm going to, get off the plane and kiss the sand and all this stuff and just automatically reclaim my Filipino-ness. And then I got, and then I went on the plane. We got off in Manila, which is, Metro, which is like the city. And I looked around and I was like, okay, there's buildings and like cement and cars and malls, and I was really like confused, and my mom could tell like I was uncomfortable. She goes, what's wrong? And I was like, nothing. She's all, what? I was like, it's a city. And she goes, yeah, we have cities here. And I was like, oh, okay. And it took me a good few days to realize like how stupid I'd been, right? Because I don't know, like the way that I feel like sometimes the way that Filipino Americans are taught about the Philippines is very nostalgic and very like Bahay Kubo. Everyone lives in these like banana,
kind of like rose tinted glasses,
right? You have like this like really idealized way of looking at it, where everyone lives on a sandy beach in this beautiful coconut hut and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, life has never looked like that. and so it's just really weird for me to kind of get out of my head. You know, like, oh, like that was also another really messed up view of the Philippines. You know, and so it was very fun being there. But you know, but it was weird because it was January. It was really hot, like ridiculously hot, and then
and you're coming from like here where it's like freezing cold in January.
Yeah, I came off with like a parka and all this stuff, and it was really hot, and I was like, okay, I don't understand. My mom's like, it's an island. It's an island. Like, it's gonna be hot, and I was like, okay. So we had to go get whole new clothes for me because I did not pack anything for hot weather, and then just the amount of people in the house I was not used to. So it was my mom's brother's house. He was the oldest. His wife, and then their kids, who are grown, and then their families. And so there was at least
living under one roof, or just
living under one roof.
Oh wow!
And so there's at least 3 generations.
Is that pretty common, or?
It felt like it because then the neighbors, they all lived together with their families too, and just going around. And I was like, it just works that way.
What motivates it? Is it just like, is it kind of something that's like a societal norm, or is it economically motivated, or?
I'm not entirely sure. I feel like it's, well, no, that's a lie. I know some of it is economically motivated because my uncle is an overseas contract worker. So he would work in Dubai, engineering stuff, building whatever he needs to build or come up with blueprints. And so his income would support the family, and that's what I'm assuming. I'm not entirely sure. That's why they all lived in the same place, is to make sure that, that he would take care of all of them, right? That was kind of his duty, is to take care of, like, not only his family, but then his family's family, right? Like, their kids, their grandkids, all that stuff. So I think it is economical of, like, because of the economical nature of the Philippines is so dependent on these overseas workers that they all kind of just stay in the same house. And it's also very familial. Like everyone's, well, they always say, oh, Filipinos are really close to their family, and so like they all just kind of take care of each other, right? And it comes a lot with like, oh, when you get older, you're gonna take care of me when I'm old, right? And so I think that's what it comes down to too. Is
how prevalent, like how, I guess, because that's something that's really intriguing in all the readings that we've been going over has been like this whole culture built around overseas workers. And how obvious was that culture when you were there? Like, were you expecting to see a lot of it? Is it brought up frequently? I was
really, because I didn't know anything about the Philippines until I moved to San Francisco and was kind of taught about these things. I'd never heard of overseas workers, but then when I thought about it, like both of my uncles are work in Dubai or parts of Saudi or somewhere else, and then when I would look back, like my cousins were like managers of Pizza Huts in Singapore, and my other cousins were nurses in Spain,
and all of them did the whole remittance thing too?
All of them were going to school to leave, or planning to leave, or have left already. And so when I went there and I realized that, I was like, oh, they're like, oh, we're home for vacation. I was like, where do you work? And they're like, oh, Amsterdam, or, places in Europe, places in other Asian countries. And I was like, none of you stay. And they're like, well, we can't. There's nothing there, or there's more money somewhere else. Or, and it was crazy. And all the commercials on the TV was like, come to this agency that can send you somewhere else. There was a lot of bulletin boards that were like...
So it's pretty prevalent, huge. Pretty ingrained.
It's big. It's ingrained, yeah. Like,
were you expecting it to be that, like, when you went there, or was it...
Not at all. I didn't even... like, I was like, oh, people just go if they want to go. It's like, here, like, oh... It's like that notion of, like, yeah, I'm going to go overseas and work and then come back. But over there, like, you don't come back.
Yeah.
And so, even here, it's still kind of a novelty of like, oh, I'm going to go teach English in overseas, and then figure out what I'm going to do. You know, here you have, if you have the opportunity, you're just like, and then I'm going to come back.
Yeah.
Over there, there's no coming back. So, it was really weird, and it was a little bit scary for me, because my uncle had just retired, like maybe a year when I had visited. And then he told me that he had to go back because one of his kids was having another child. And no one could really support that right now. So he's like, oh, I'm going to go back for another 2 years. And he hasn't been able to. That was in 2007. But I went, he's like, I'm going to Manila. Do you want to come? And I was like, okay, I'll go to the city with you. And we had gone to the agency, and the agency was called Magellan. Which I was just like, all right. That's really messed up, but okay, because...
a little...
you know, I was like, the Magellan work agency or whatever, and I was like, it's Magellan. It's still, like, this shit's still going on.
Yeah.
Like, we're never going to get away from it. And so, we went there, and he was the oldest one there. Everyone else was fairly young, like 20s, maybe late 30s. And they went around the room, and, it was like, and they're like, oh, what made you want to do this? Why are you, just kind of like a check-in or whatever they want to call it. And all of them were really young. They're like, oh, I'm ready to start a family, or I have to help support my ailing mother.
That's so strange to think that, if you want to start a family, you have to move out of your country.
Yeah.
And able to afford supporting it. That's...
Yeah. And so, I was listening to all these guys' stories, and I was really...
Do you want me to just take notes for you?
Really, just kind of... I didn't know how to feel, because the whole time, like, you have to leave and able to survive in the Philippines. And,
It's pretty stark.
It is. Well, that...
It seems like that to me. I mean, like, it kind of matches, like, the, kind of the literary picture we've been getting over the course of the semester.
It does, and it really... I don't know if it was, like... I don't want to say, like, everyone went through it, but I know that my family went through it. And so, like, in my family's world, that's what it was.
Can you tell me where I'm going? This is so pathetic. I don't even know where it is.
I got lost when I came in here, too.
Is it language arts meeting?
Oh, but, all of them. And then
What was the reaction of, like, other Filipinos to you personally? Did they, I mean, it's pretty much... it's fairly true that they speak a lot of English in the Philippines. It's very English speaking, so you didn't have to, like, wander around, like, asking, like, do you speak English? Do you speak English? But,
no, I mean, they would understand, but...
But you pretty clearly got a very American accent overseas, so, like, what was their reaction?
We have this thing of, we joke about it. It's like they could smell you're American. And it's very true. Like, we have different detergents, we use different soaps, and so...
Probably accustomed to different food, too, like...
Yeah, to some of the foods I was not ready for, but, it's like, oh, this is Filipino food. I'm like, nope, this is Filipino food, just the reactions I got, from family, it was just like, welcome back, or welcome home, and it was very interesting, because, one of the signs they put up for me, my cousins had put up for me, was like, welcome home, and I don't know why I was like, oh crap.
It's an interesting word to use, home.
Home, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And so it took me a while to process.
Because technically you were born there, so...
Yeah. So, and it was funny because people use home. I used to call Philippines home too, but at the same time, like, I didn't really consider it until that moment. And then I was like, oh, like, this is a sense of home that I don't know if I've been missing or have been, so I was like, okay, so I'm here to claim home again. But it was just funny. Like, my aunt, very, very protective, like, don't go anywhere without us, because someone will snatch you. And I was like, okay, I'm like 25, or however old I was then. I was like, someone's gonna snatch me.
So I've always gotten kind of the impression, just in the limited time I spent reading what we've been reading about in class, that there's almost kind of like a culture of almost ingrained discrimination, as in, we've talked a lot about, like, you're either too Filipino or you're not
Oh.
Filipino enough.
Oh, yeah.
Did you get a sense of that when you were there?
Oh, when I was there, of course. One of the family friends, there was like, that there was a welcoming party for my mother, and they invited all her friends from like her barrio and all the neighbors who remembered her, and just everyone was at the house. And they were talking to them, to my dad, and then when they would try to talk to me, it was a lot of smiling. It was just like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "I'm good,"
And you probably get some of the same stuff here too, so it's like
it's
it's
a little
lose
bit.
lose.
It was
isn't
very
it?
weird getting it from neighbors and family members over there of how do you approach this person that you who's clearly different.
Yeah.
And so one of my uncles started talking to me in Tagalog, and I was just kind of like, "Sorry, uncle, I don't." He goes, "Oh," and then he goes, "Pampangan," and I was like, or Kapampangan, I forget how you say it, but I was like, "No." He goes, "Spanish?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "English." "Okay, I'll practice my English with you." And I was like, "Oh man," I barely speak English, and here's this guy who's like multilingual and just expecting all these things.
It's impressive in its own right. I mean, that's pretty...
Yeah. Well, the majority of everyone there, at least 3 languages, like their home language, and then the national language or the main language or whatever they want to call it, Tagalog, and then English, and then to some extent Spanish.
Like how many people did you encounter there that were just? I mean, are pretty much most people there multilingual?
Yeah.
That's a lot of...
Because
That's just a strange amount of talent to have, and I mean, you have that many people who are capable of learning that many languages in a poor country. That's striking to me.
Yeah, and so it's funny because here everyone's like, "Oh, they you don't want to confuse him." Everywhere else they speak at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
Like Tim, the TA, he speaks 7.
Wow,
And he's just like, this is just how it is. Like, you learn languages
that's impressive.
and able to talk to people because that's how you talk to people. Especially
Kind of like English and Spanish, and only because I was like, if you don't speak Spanish in California, you're at a disadvantage. So
well, that's what they say, right? But they don't teach you that until what, college or
I think
high
they
school.
started
you start
in
high school.
7th grade. I think,
Yeah,
for
you start
me, it was
fairly
like
later.
yeah, and they don't do a very immersive job of it either. It's very cursory.
Yeah, it's
not-
very like here are the main phrases you need to know.
Yeah.
There it's immersed. Like you go to school. And then they immediately start teaching you Tagalog, and then English is probably spoken in the houses by then. And it's on TV, and there are places where it's like English only because it's higher education. So there's
that kind of sense of like ingrained inferiority complex where the higher up in the education system you go within your own country.
Yeah.
It's not your own country's native language.
Yeah.
That's kind of...
So that was one of the things that one of my professors taught me is like in the Philippines at some point, like the saying used to be you would speak English at work, Spanish at home, and then Tagalog to the servants. And so it was kind of like that was what the saying used to be, like Tagalog, even though that's the language, that's the place that you're at, is not important. Like those things are important. And so, I mean, I saw it in parts of my house where it was English. They would just speak English. And, so I was like, okay. Like, it was very weird. Just going back and seeing all those things. And kind of, taking what I know back then, like when I was learning all this stuff and learning about imperialism, learning about capitalism, learning about, basically the history of like how the Philippines has been screwed over and over and over, and then I was like, okay, yeah, like whatever, it's history books, like, and then seeing it in first person, you're just like, whoa, it was weird.
It's kind of the amount of damage it does. A little shocking.
Yeah, the damage, and then just the culture has completely changed around these things, So it was weird for me to be there, and then here I am, I'm still the tourist, and I'm still wanting to go these places, and not understanding like, oh, I'm still kind of feeding into that idea, but I also did want to see parts of home. So
yeah,
it's very odd for me, but
so on the topic of discrimination, as someone who is by and large mostly Filipino. Do you ever get discriminated against in the U.S.? I mean, which is a loaded question, I'm sure. But
well, it was really funny because when I first moved up here, everyone's like, "Oh, racism, racism." I was like, "Never, no one's ever been racist to me." You know? And then I would look back and I was like, motherfucker, everyone was racist to me. You know, one of the only Asian kids in school, I was called several names, but, you know, just kind of, you know, names are names. And then teachers are like, names are just names, and those are just words, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, whatever. You know, and in Porterville, you were, like, no one knew what Filipino was. So you were Chinese, or you were Japanese, and those weren't things to be, right?
Yeah, I think I remember, like, the Filipino kids I actually went to high school with did not say they were Filipino.
Oh,
if you
no.
asked, if anybody asked, it was like Islander.
Yeah.
They just used the word Islander
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they didn't expect anyone to know what or where the Philippines was.
Yeah.
I don't think.
I grew up calling myself Chinese.
Really?
Yeah. Well, because if two of my aunts actually, they're ethnically Chinese but Philippine born, so a lot of their stuff is very Chinese, and so you know, I ate their food and I'd be like, oh, okay, then that means I'm part Chinese. But it was also like I didn't know how to identify as Filipino, so when everyone asked me, I was like, oh yeah, I'm like Chinese. You know, I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
And so later on, I would start saying Pacific Islander, and then in high school, you know, you were part Hawaiian. You know, every Filipino wants to be part Hawaiian. That was the joke. We always, yeah. So I had no idea, and the discrimination that came down upon it, it was just like, well, you're just that other Asian, or like, you know. Other than the names, it was just the way that people approached. I still kind of can't figure it out because it's not as blatant, or can be
Certainly not in
blatant.
the Bay Area.
Not here.
It's like a nice little microcosm of much greater tolerance in the Bay Area, I think, especially compared to where I grew up.
Oh,
so I
yeah.
can see that.
I mean, there's still stuff up here, but they, you know, now they know what to call you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think back.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, I think just growing up in the Central Valley, it was people didn't know how to associate you, so they always just associated you with something else. And then other parts of discrimination, like they would make potlucks just so I could bring lumpia, and I never saw that as discrimination. But then they're like, no, that's discrimination because then that's essentializing who you are, and that's only like that's all you're good for. And I was like, oh, okay, like I didn't see that as something, but you know, I'm starting to see it now. I'm starting to see like just these little we call them microaggressions, but these things that are like not supposed to be racist but are completely racist.
Yeah,
we see that. It was that, and then it was like my name. My name was like a big upset in school because Grace Burns, and then having this face, you know, like I always got second looks, or like, are you sure? Like, I'm pretty sure I know my name.
a little bit. Yeah,
just a little bit, and then they would be like, oh, so who's the white one in your family? I'm like, well, it's obviously my dad. But then I'm like, does it even, you know? And you know, I would be like, oh, I always thought I was like, oh, they want to know more, and they're like, no, that's kind of a dig at you. And I was like, okay. And so they're just
kids can be nasty.
It's these weird things, just like these weird things that keep coming up with discrimination. But it was a lot of that, and then you know, places I worked, people would just be, you know, they're like, oh, we're joking, but they called me Dada because of the Goonies, because the Asian kid, and then you know. I had these, like, always these nicknames that were associated to someone else who was Asian. Or, like, they called me Mulan and all this stuff. So it was just these little things. Nothing overly, like...
Kind of like in line with the word user, like microaggression.
Yeah,
so like a
small.
constant, like, or kind of like a low grade baseline small bit of...
Yeah. I think more so on a scale, I see it more, like, within media, which I'm kind of seeing more. Like there's comments in the media that are starting to dig at Filipinos. Like there was that comment on Desperate Housewives with the doctor. It was like, I want to make sure your degree's not from the Philippines. And then there's other comments about on NBC there was comments about I think it was Frasier, is like, oh, I bought this tie for so much, and the dad goes, I could buy a Filipino wife for less than that. And then, you know, there was even in like it's even prevalent in British TV, because like there's an episode of Torchwood where one of the characters is you know, talking about kids, and they're like, oh, maybe we can just adopt a Filipino child and have them clean our chimneys.
Zing.
And so
That's
I'm
terrible.
like, yeah, right.
That's
and I'm
terrible.
like, I'm seeing it more, and I don't know how to approach it. I'm like, okay, we're coming up because people know who we are, can name us, but then at the same time, we're also the butt of jokes a lot of the time. And so it's not so much here in America, because that lower class of people of color tends to go towards people of like not Latin, of like Mexican descent, right? But everywhere else in the world, it's Filipino, and so the butt of the jokes, you know, go with those two.
So like on the other, one thing that I was kind of really interested in was this. I wanted to see if you kind of observed any of this too when you were in the Philippines, or if you see this in the Filipino culture that you've, you know, sort of woven around yourself. But I was really fascinated by the whole concept of a third gender that they had there. Like, was that pretty visible when you were there?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, yes. So the third gender is something I'm still trying to wrap my head around, but there are the ideas of like the males who consider them who are both. It's just, I can't really articulate, but they're called ancient back in the day they were called like Biogwins or something, where they embodied well, we would consider them embodying both genders, where they, you know, and would live their lives how they live their lives. The third gender, I think it mostly comes up with seeing queer culture in the Philippines. And queer culture in the Philippines is very showy. For lack of a better word, it's like a drag show. And having these male bodies as female. That's the only way I can say it, because the only thing I understand is the binary right now. But there is a...
So what's the tolerance level for it like in Filipino culture? I mean, to your knowledge.
We don't talk about it.
Really?
Yeah. Especially with queerness. You don't talk about it. It's very interesting, because like there's a very queer presence within the media. The gay men will be flamboyantly, like outlandishly queer or gay or girly, and they're considered bakla. Like they are.
That's a term I've seen, especially like on really derogatorily. Like if I have Filipino friends, which, you know, I've been making since I've been living in the Bay. You know, you see their Facebook page, and someone will make like a comment with that word, and I'm like, I know what that word means now. That's derogatory the way you're using it, and
it is. You know, those were the girly boys, the you know, the ones who lived as women, because they couldn't. You know, that's the only way people could identify them as. And then there's the T-boy, or Tibo, which is the equivalent for females when they, you know, for lesbians.
Yeah, and it's the same, like have to be overly masculinized, basically,
masculine,
in order to be socially accepted?
A little bit of both. But like that's how they saw it, and that's, you know, if you're gay, you're that other, right? So if you're...
So basically, it's almost like I got the sense from reading about it, because, you know, I wish I had the time or interest for like queer studies in general, because it's fascinating. Not very career viable for me, but fascinating, you know, especially, you know, growing up, from my perspective, like gay in the foothills sucked. Yeah. But, you know, I guess that's one of the reasons it's so interesting, and it just kind of struck me that you have, in the Philippines, like you have this culture that, in a sense, has a societal place for it, but it's like, you get to be gay. We'll accept you as gay, but you're our entertainment. It's almost like you know, in order to be accepted, you have to be like a clown. You have to make us laugh.
A little bit. So there's that, like, okay, we're going to accept you, but you have to be this type.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're a lesbian, you have to outwardly look like a lesbian.
So despite having, like, a societal niche for it, it still manages to be, like, heteronormative in a sense, because you only get to be this if you kind of eschew who you actually are and become more of a thing than a person, I guess. That was...
Yeah, it's very...
Like, the focus is on what you are, not so much who you are. Like, you have to be this in order to be accepted, or quote-unquote accepted.
That's what I see, especially in the media. Like, once someone comes out, all of a sudden they have this completely physical change. And it's a little bit jarring, because I was just like, oh, all right, that's how you have to be there, right?
Yeah.
Here, you know, with our variations between men, women, and you know, even variations between queerness, like, we can be who we are, and no one's gonna care, right? Well, to some point, no one's gonna care, or people will accept you. Well, I should say, people will care and accept you in like this, you know, this very different, embracing manner. But there, you're either this or that, even if you're outside of that construct. And so, but then, like,
is that something that carries over here? I mean, granted, you've only been in the Bay for, you know, a short amount of time, but, like, I guess before going into this question, like, what's been your exposure with, like, Filipino culture in the Bay?
It was complete culture shock. You know, growing up in, like, this little tiny farm community bubble, I didn't know any other Filipinos or any other Asians or anybody was out there, right? So I came up here and, you know, walked around Daly City and was kind of confused, and walked around San Francisco a little bit confused. I was like, oh, Filipinos, cool, you know? I didn't understand, like, the the severity of it until I walked into the mall and realized, like, everybody was Filipino. Everyone was speaking some sort of Filipino language, everyone. And I was like, what the hell, where am I? And I didn't realize, like, how, these are my words back then, like, how bad it was, and I didn't understand, you know, they were all over the place. And it's this very disconnected, you know, like, these are my people, but I'm not connected to them at all. And it was complete culture shock. I didn't understand that people could have these communities outside of the Philippines, right?
So, I mean, does a lot of it carry over? Like, do you see a lot of similarities from what you saw when you visited the Philippines in, like, Filipino communities here? Like, or does it assimilate pretty quickly, or is it really...
I would say you see it. Like, you still see, like, the multiple families living together. It's completely different. I want to say it's a little bit different than how it is over there because of the need of having to stick together, because there's no one out there who's going to help you, right? But, you know, there it's like, oh, let's stick together to stick together. Here it's like, stick together because there ain't no one going to help you, right?
Particularly if language is a barrier, I would imagine.
Especially if language is a barrier. So you do see it. You do see somewhat similarities. When I came to Daly City, like, Daly City and parts of San Francisco are very set up the way the Philippines is set up. There's this town center. Usually it might be the mall, might be the supermarket, and then there's, like, churches, and then there's you know, the residents, the houses and stuff like that. So it's very similar in how they try to do things, right? They try to keep traditions. They try to keep them. They try to do, you know, they keep the food and keep all these things. And I would say Daly City, because there's still an influx of immigration coming in. So they try to keep everything the same.
Yeah, it's been...
as much as they can.
Daly City's been interesting. I always remember telling my parents I was going to move here, and my dad's first words were, better learn Tagalog.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's like, I hear that, like, I walk out into my hallway and you smell seafood and you hear Tagalog or a very Filipino sounding
Yeah.
language. You'll hear it everywhere.
Yeah. And so I think I was just not prepared for that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I grow up, everyone forgets, everyone, you know, assimilates. Here, people don't.
Mm-hmm.
Or they can't. Well, I don't want to say...
Kind of like a little microcosm, almost.
A little bit. I don't want to say my parents were forced to kind of do that, but they were. And
Mm-hmm.
here, like, because they were all alone. Here, there's tons of resources,
Mm-hmm.
you know, cultural resources that you can pull from that they don't really need to change that much or
Mm-hmm.
assimilate, I should say. They just adapt and then continue. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, Daly City was just scary for me for a while.
Really?
Yeah, I was just not used to it. I've never seen so many Filipinos in my life. You know, I still, you know, there's days that I wake up and I'm like, I still, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I walk into a classroom full of Filipinos. I've never seen that before.
Yeah,
And-
now you're teaching the Kababayan program
Yeah.
class, so it's
you
like,
know,
it's got to be a pretty big discrepancy.
It is. Like, I wanted to become a writer, to take English, because I didn't think there was any Filipinos who were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Then I come to San Francisco State and realize there's been Filipinos doing that for 100 years. And then I come to Skyline, and it's like, people have been teaching this for, you know, a good 40, 50 years. And I was like, where the fuck was I? Right?
It's like, what's been the process of, like, getting involved in, I guess, to what degree are you involved in, like, local Filipino community, and what's that process been like?
Ugh. I'm all up in it. I started out with an org, 2007, you know, freshly new to San Francisco, freshly new to university life. Someone at an organization just came up to me and was like, "You're Filipino, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm Filipino." They're like, "Do you know anything about the Philippines?" I was like, "No." "Do you know anything about, like, the political nature?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "Do you know anything?" And I was like, "I think I know who the president is." And they're all, "Oh, great, who's the president?" And I was like, Cory Aquino. Cory Aquino had been the president in, like, the 80s. It was, like, 2007. So she just kind of looked at me and, like, you know, with a smile and a nod, and was like, "Oh, here's the flyer, you should come to our meeting." And I was like, yes, I should. So that was kind of my entry, and that organization was very, very political, very buck-bucking, we call it. Like, they were out in the streets, protesting with bullhorns and propa signs, and, you know, I got caught up in that. I got very caught up in protesting in that lifestyle of angriness.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first in. And then through there and through other outlets at San Francisco State, I got into a program called Pinoy Pinay Educational Partnerships, which teaches in San Francisco school district Filipino American everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was through that program that I kind of shed that anger and put in all my energy into teaching and knowing about the Filipino community in San Francisco and to an extent Daly City.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was with them for a good 10 years, and then I got hooked up with Kababayan program and hooked up with a job.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got it. That's a short way of how I got here. I'm still really involved in the community through... I'm not hands in it as much as I would like to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still involved with petitions and still learning, still involved with, like, the students I was with and learning about their communities. And I'm involved with the students now and learning about Kababayan and learning more about Daly City, because when I moved to Daly City, it's very... There's, like, no one on the streets. That's the only way I can say it. It's, like, it's very... it can be isolating if you don't know the right people. And I didn't know the right people. I only knew my roommates. So it was very lonely. And then going from Daly City, from my house in Daly City, to going to these community meetings, I was like, where is everyone?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why can this community that we establish in the meetings and in these, these things be outside of this room, or something like that. So it's very interesting, and it's very youth based what I do. But I'm still somewhat in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to talk about, because I've done my papers on this, and one of the big things that I addressed in my papers as being an obstacle to identity formation was sexuality, and I was staggered by the lack of relevant information I was able to come up with about what it is to be gay in either the Philippines or in Filipino culture in the United States. What's been your observation of that, like, if any?
Like I said, like I said before, to be gay in the Philippines, you were it's a performance, very much performance, and it's out there in the media, but people don't talk about it. People just don't talk about it. In the homes, you don't talk about it, and then especially when you transfer to America, it just doesn't happen. Like, you're not gay.
Because that was, I remember when I came, one of my best friends, wasn't Filipino, but his best friends were, and there was this entire attitude that when I told them I was gay in high school, the immediate response was, "No, you're not." I was like, "Excuse me?" Like, "Well, you don't act it." I'm like, "Act what?" I'm like,
That's
it's not about,
exactly
it's not
why.
acting.
Yeah.
I'm not acting a certain way. It's an aspect, like blue eyes or blonde hair. I can't act blue-eyed, and I can't act blonde-haired, so how can I act? You know what I mean? Like, that was the response, and I don't think I ever understood it until recently as to why that was that group of friends' response in particular was,